Welcome back to Athens Happens. I'm Izzy Keller, managing editor of The New Political.
And I'm Madeline Harden, editor-in-chief of The New Political.
Athens Happens is a podcast brought to you by The New Political, a student publication dedicated to explaining the nuances of Ohio University, Athens, and state politics.
You can find new episodes at thenewpolitical.com or wherever else podcasts can be downloaded.
Today, we are discussing the party school culture in relation to sexual violence with TMP opinion writer Jess Horner and Ohio University Associate Director of Prevention and Education, Ann Brandon. Jessica, thanks for being here. Ann, can you tell me a little bit about your position at OU?
Sure. As the Associate Director of Prevention and Education, I'm in charge of really what we consider harm reduction in many buckets. So one would be prevention of intimate partner violence. That would be sexual violence, relationship violence, stalking. I'm also in charge of prevention for alcohol and other drugs, mental health and well-being. And we're kind of just reshaping our office and initiatives right now, too.
Very cool.
Awesome, Anne. Thank you for sharing. So we're currently in what is called the red zone, which is a period of time from Welcome Week in August to Thanksgiving in November, where most instances of sexual violence takes place. Jessica covered this with a new opinion piece about navigating the realities of a party school. So Jessica, can you tell me a little bit about your reporting?
Yeah, so I kind of just wanted to look at the realities of what students, incoming and like upperclassmen, have to get used to in a party school and across college campuses in general, because it is harder for the faculty and staff to really have an effect on what happens outside, especially on the weekends. So yeah.
Yeah, you described, campus looks a lot different on Friday and Saturday night than it does on a Monday. Can you describe that a little bit for me? I know, I know you're not the only one who has experience on the weekends, but it definitely is a huge shift.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone dresses a little differently.
Yeah.
People are acting a little differently, compared to people walking down Court Street at 9 a.m. to 1 a.m. It's a much different
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've noticed walking through the escalators at 10 o'clock at night on a Friday, and you see drunk kids going down. And the faculty kind of just roams around them, doesn't say anything because it's just the normality of it.
I'll ask you this: when you first applied to Ohio University, did you have any preconceived notions about OU?
Well, everyone that I said I might be going to OU, all of my family members the party school, and I was yeah, it's not why I'm going, but it didn't really have an effect on my decision to come. But I know it's the first thing people know about the school.
Right. Right.
I think we've all kind of had to deal with that reputation.
Yeah.
I it's nodding
Yeah,
too.
30 years ago.
Yeah.
When people said that 30 years ago.
Yeah. It's do you think that it's gotten a little bit better from?
Yeah, from what I've heard, it's gotten a lot more tame and not as bad as it used to be.
For sure.
Yeah, I think COVID definitely had something to do with that. A lot of, it killed numbers fast for one thing.
That's true.
But do you think so you've been through the EverFi trainings, all of these things are kind of fresh in your mind. How would you compare that to the experiences you've had on campus so far?
I think in the trainings that they give us, they mostly tell us things that we already know, and from the ones that I've been through, they're during orientation, and it's one of the last things they tell us, so most people are trying to get out and get it over with. But yeah, they mostly tell us things that we're already aware of, and it doesn't really change anything from what I've seen.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think needs to happen to change, or at least to better navigate the party school culture?
Well, this isn't really possible, I don't think, but I think people need to outright see what can happen and the effects that it can have, because we've all seen, we've all heard about this can't happen and this can't happen, and we're yeah, whatever. But when someone on my floor has an incident happen or gets roofied or something, it's this is real. This is happening to people around me, and it just hits harder.
Yeah, I think that's always the worst reality to have to face, that it's you don't really either realize the severity of it or really care about it enough until it happens to either you or someone you love.
Which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
Or even just somebody that you live with. Like when
Yeah.
you're living in the dorms, when you're a new freshman and you're living in the dorms, and like I remember a kid got roofied and was like, looked like he was seizing on the floor within the first like month of school. And, you know, that left an impact on me. So I think it's just like seeing this and understanding like this is where I am and this is what can happen if I'm not super careful. So,
And I just want to talk about that. Like, we all, just the conversation of we have to be super careful. Just think about that.
yeah, you're absolutely right.
That's not going to stop us from being harmed. Being super careful did not stop people from being harmed. These aren't decisions that they made. Like, I want to go out. The worst thing that should happen is a hangover to anyone. Like, having fun. Like, this is college. You're supposed to experience. I'm not saying to go out and get drunk and have a hangover. I'm just saying, like, there's nothing that someone can do or say. We get confused.
Yeah.
That there's something we could actually do or say to stop ourselves from being harmed. And I'm not talking about gender and just femme folk. I'm talking about the fact that there is a culture across the United States in our communities that allows sexual and intimate partner violence to occur.
Yeah,
There's
victim
like-
blaming.
Right. But in general. So
Yeah.
we talk about the red zone, we talk about this, but these things are happening in our communities too. They happen across campus. This is the highest rate, like 18 to 24 is the highest rate where folks are going to get harmed, like for sexual violence. But we think about this, like 20 to 25% of students will be directly affected. And yeah, so I know someone, but that's a pretty large number. And we don't talk about that. We wait till the 5 minutes in orientation.
Yeah.
We know that EverFi is compliance. You know, like it's a way to introduce information as well, but it's compliance because we do need to let people know. But like just the thought that we're only connected or we only want to talk about it when like maybe it happens to somebody we know, or like I know we care about it. We intrinsically as humans we all care about it, but we haven't cared about it to actually stop it from happening, right? Or do people have the tools, right? But we cannot say that one person is going to be able to stop themselves from harm when the culture itself accepts the harm.
Yeah, with the training that like we are given in like BSO, it's mostly targeted like at potential victims. Like it's saying how to help yourself from getting in that position. But for the most part, like most students are being careful. Like they're doing everything they can, but you can't directly like talk to a perpetrator and say, don't do this, because that's not going to get you anywhere.
Right. So how we address those who do the harm is really important too. Right. And yes.
But kind of going off what you were saying, Jess, you looked at a specific popular drinking spot on campus. And, you know, it's known that harm goes on there. It's been somewhat addressed publicly, but like we've seen no real consequences. So I guess what I'm trying to get at here is like, and this can go towards both of you, why? You know, is it just because freshmen need somewhere to get drunk, or is the culture really so much so that I'm going to prioritize the fun culture vibe over safety?
Do you mean like as why students still go, or why like there hasn't been like actual consequences?
I guess both.
I think
I'd say more so students though.
Okay, I think more students just end up there either because I've heard like upperclassmen like saying, "Oh yeah, no, it doesn't actually happen there. Like you can go." And I mean, who are they going to believe except older people? And like especially when you're a freshman and underclassmen in general, like you want to go somewhere that like you can get a drink, and you think like, "Oh, why not? Like I'll stop in here."
Right.
If you think about perpetrator behavior, and I want to be really clear because sometimes when we say perpetrator behavior, we're automatically saying that this is men or male identified. And the majority of folks who harm are men. And I'm not talking about the majority of men. So please make sure that the person listening to this understands. Only a small percentage of folks harm other people. They just happen to do it over and over again because that is like the statistics. So if you are male identified and you're listening to this, please get past this first statement. We have all identities, all intersectional folks, all non-binary. There's a lot of people who get harmed, but the majority of folks who are harming we're actually leaving them out of the conversation, right? We're not saying it's almost like there's an invisible harm that's happening to folks on campus, right? Kind of like what you said as far as like the accountability that's kind of left out of it, right? And I don't know if I was clear on that, but just the reality of engaging the folks that are doing harm. Their behaviors are not going to be deterred unless a larger majority of folks stand up and say no. So the accountability isn't going to come through a legal process, probably. The accountability is not going to come through a disciplinary process unless it's clear evidence and investigated that whatever is happening in this space happens. And that is just super frustrating that there's not accountability. But if the majority of folks, those who do not harm, which is the majority of male-identified folk, stepped up and stepped in, we know that we could end this tomorrow.
Yeah.
No,
Yes, and goodbye.
No, definitely. I think there's also, and I think you touch on this too, Jessica, in your story about like, people don't know how to be a good bystander. And I know Anne's just itching in her chair to start talking about better bystanders. But that is what it comes down to. Like, people are too scared to say something. So, Anne, I'll let you go off about,
I
go ahead.
More like perpetrators, or I guess, yeah. Like if you're one of your friends or someone you know is in doing something like that, like you don't really expect them to, but if you hear about it, you're like, oh, like, I'm sure it's not like as bad as it seems, or like, oh, like they're my friend, and it just gets more normalized until like maybe they are like, oh, maybe I'll try this too. That's a weird way of putting it, but
yeah,
and it just spreads out more.
And definitely in certain social groups, there is like a social pressure to comply and accept and even take part in like very harmful, unacceptable behaviors.
Especially if they know like their friends aren't going to say anything about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
If they're not called in. I want to add to that some internalized misogyny. Right? So and I'm going to get, you guys are going to get hate comments, but we take sides when we hear harm has happened. And I want you to, like, that is the most harmful thing for a survivor, is not to be believed. And so there's 2 points to what you're saying. One, the behavior becomes normalized and acceptable in certain groups. So what you said is very true. Like, after an incident, oh no, this person who's kind and charming couldn't possibly have done that.
Yeah.
Because we can't think of our friends as potential rapists, right? Like that, no, our friends would never do that. But then this whole he said, she said, or they said, or that, you know, like, I don't want to go to the non-binary, like, really the reality is that it is more harmful for that friend or girls and men to not just be like, I wasn't there. And so I'm not going to add and pile on to a survivor that the first reaction that a survivor or someone says is, if we don't believe them, it's almost as harmful as the actual assault itself.
Yeah.
And so we really need to do a better job of not jumping in on things. Well, I couldn't have done that, you know? And I'm sure that people are like, and we shouldn't jump on someone who's been, when I say jump on, like, you know, we've got to be neutral. But the reality is that the accountability is generally not there. And so it is important, if somebody says I was harmed, that we just hold space and check in with them too.
Right. What do you guys think need to happen to be able to navigate a party school, or in OU's case, we'll say a reformed party school? Jess, I'll give this one to you first. You've got a semester under your belt.
I know she's like you're in like a really interesting position because you are a first semester freshman.
Yeah.
But you don't speak for everyone.
No, of course. Jess speaks for Jess.
So you're every single freshman in the room right now.
Exactly.
Yes.
In this room.
Yeah, I'm sure my experiences are very different from like other freshmen. But I mean, already like what I do on the weekends is like pretty like routine now. Like I basically have the same amount of fun and like do the same things. But like I noticed different things each time. Like, oh, there was like a really weird scene I was like dancing next to, and I was like, that was weird this time. And then like I've been noticing it more and more, like the more places I go. What was the question?
What do you think needs to happen so we can better navigate this party school or reformed party school?
Well, first of all, I think more safety after being, I guess, intoxicated. One of the biggest things I've noticed is I've been out with some friends and like we're very strong on the fact of like, okay, don't drink something that you're just seeing lying around. Don't drink something like that, you know, you just pick up.
Mm-hmm.
And then like I see people going by and like, oh, they're like already kind of drunk, like that goes out the window. And it's like, oh, this is a free drink. It's full. Like it's mine now. And like, I think a lot of times we go in stronger minded than we come out. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. You mentioned it in your story that like we almost like get too complacent or we get too comfortable, especially in Athens. Athens is a relatively safe city that we feel more comfortable. I mean, we are literally in a bubble. Athens is a bubble. So we think it's okay to I can walk home by myself. Nothing's gonna happen. You know, we just get too comfortable that we're not always being aware of our surroundings, and that's just not just for our safety, but also for the safety of the people that we're with. Which I guess then goes back into, you know, shouldn't be all victim focused, but it is good. It's good to just be aware of your surroundings as it is.
I'll like, if I'm going out with my friends, like if one of them wants to walk home alone, I'm like, no, that's not happening. Like I'm walking home with you. But if I'm the one like leaving my group of friends, I'm like, no, like I know me, like I can walk home. But it's different because I'm, you know, me, and I obviously have more confidence in myself than I do anybody else.
Yeah.
That's called risk reduction. And understandable. Be like, I should have a plan. Let's have a plan before we go out. And it may fall by the wayside. We don't want it to fall by the wayside, but we like, you know, at the end, everybody gets back together and we're going home together and like, right, we're having conversations. So setting up a plan for safety is not a bad thing, but risk reduction does not actually decrease numbers of people who are affected by sexual violence. So yeah, there's an awareness, and I understand what y'all are saying. That's basically like, hey, let's have a rape nail polish. No. We have to focus on the prime or the root causes of this. We have to invest in primary prevention, and here's the good thing. They're doing that here. They're doing it here. We cannot continue to stay at this individual level. Which is important. I don't want to discount taking care of yourself, being aware of your surroundings. No, we have to do that innately as femme folk or, you know, other identities as well. Because we have to. Like, did you learn to carry your keys a certain way, right? So you could stab someone, right? So I'm like, we have to learn these things. I'm not saying to drop all that by the wayside. But if we stay at that individual level, we are never going to make a dent in harm in the campus. We're just going to continue to send people to survivor advocacy programs or Title IX or report or nothing, or they drop out. Primary prevention, which is addressing the root causes of why someone harms, not why someone is harmed. That's where we're moving. That's what we should be talking about.
Can you tell us a little bit more about like the university, like
Sure.
what you're working on with prevention?
Sure. So the Office of Health Promotion throughout COVID was led by 3 GAs and some peer educators, which they very much, and well-being and recreation. So I'm just saying, like during COVID, it was pretty short-staffed, and so they made a commitment to rebuild the office in 2020-ish. 2021 was when I was hired, and the Office of Health Promotion, again, prevention and education. Think about like well-being and education. So hiring me. And then we're hiring 2 assistant directors, and then we're going to be hiring a whole new peer health educators to create a peer health network. Because here's the thing, I think I'm cool, but I'm not that cool to go out and talk to students. They're going to be like, what is this lady? And who is she, right? So we need people that have like social equity, like social justice and equity, but also like an understanding of like, I didn't know about the Blue House. I've only been here for a year. Like, I don't know these things. So investing in that, we're paying the peer health educators. They're putting money towards this. And then also we have are building less one-time, 1 hour awareness that does not actually measurably change behavior. And building in our strategy is more comprehensive, like multi-layered programming. Now, with all that jargon, something like Green Dot, something like they've invested in Green Dot. Green Dot is a primary prevention for like competency for bystander intervention and how to stand, like how to do something without losing that social capital that you're talking about, how to do something and remove those barriers. It is a expensive, comprehensive, national evidence-based program. And it's really exciting that they've brought it here. I don't want to denounce the work that led up to this space, because you had to build blocks. But normally you have a survivor advocacy program, or you have a women's center, or you have a response that has like part-time prevention folks. And you cannot do primary prevention. You cannot address the root causes of something by just having a part-time prevention person for the whole campus. So just the investing of positions and the peer health educator network and a curriculum that has fidelity and it actually measurably reduces harm on campus. So that's the nutshell.
Yeah, that's exciting to see
Yeah.
happen. I guess not to put like a time constraint on it, but it's
No.
like, so when do you think the school will be fixed? Like,
Yeah.
just, you know?
So here's the good thing. No, you're right. This is a great question. So school being fixed is kind of hard, but what indicators, what can tell us that
Yeah.
our work is impactful? So I was part of the original Green Dot research, which was, it was started at the University of Kentucky, and it's now run by Altruistic, which is a really cool nonprofit in Washington, D.C. And here's the thing is we've never, and the like violence on campuses has been happening since the dawn of time, right? Like, so campuses were built for white men who own property, really. I mean, white men.
Literally.
Let's right. So the folks that are most harmed are people where higher education wasn't actually built for. So we're talking about systemic oppression for all types of entities for a really long time. And rape has happened since the dawn of man. Let's talk, so Anne's like, okay, let's go back to the origins of the world. And no, we don't need to roll back that far. But the idea that we really, in this research, we've never, ever measurably reduced harm. Sexual violence, dating violence, bullying has never actually measurably been reduced in a research project before this. And so that's why Anne's off her chair about Green Dot and bystander intervention is because I got to be part of that research. And we're talking about 28,000 students and 26 schools in Kentucky and high schools, 13 control schools, 13 implementation schools. And we implemented Green Dot for 5 years in those schools. And it happened in the third or fourth year that we actually measurably saw 50% reduction in sexual violence, intimate partner violence or dating violence, and bullying. And so there's an idea that we can never reduce violence. And if we don't have hope, if we think that the only way we can do that is to protect our drinks and to walk home together, we'll never do it. And so my enthusiasm is because I've seen it happen, right? I've been a part of it. So I'm saying probably by year 3 or 4. Now here's another thing is you have to have climate surveys that measure it. You have to have data that actually says I could be oh, we're doing great. But no, we have to have actual an evaluation. And so the key indicators, you have to have a baseline. If students don't fill out climate surveys, I know it's a pain. But we can't get an accurate measurement if we only have a small sample of who's being harmed. And so filling those out would be give us a baseline, and then we can measure, a reduction in violence, a change in culture, a change in behavior, the numbers of people who feel safe and confident bystanding, doing something when they see something that's weird on the dance floor. You have tools to stop it.
Mm-hmm.
That was a long answer, but
It definitely answered my question.
yeah.
I think that, that's a really, it's telling, people this is what we're doing to help protect you and to help prevent something. Well, you know, to help people who are, I'm trying to think of how I want to word this, but like, you know, the school's doing something, basically, summarizes
Harm
it.
impacts everyone.
Yeah.
Impacts everyone. If we think, oh, it just impacts a certain identity or a certain gender, we're really wrong. It impacts everyone. We have less engagement. We have more depression. We have more anxiety. We have more people dropping out. A small percentage of people actually report being harmed. You know, they just leave, right? So it impacts more than just the bottom line.
Yeah.
Mm. But I see what you mean, that it's like, you know, we're trying, we have these things implemented, but it also, I think, the student community also has to be receptive to it. You know, students have to, you know, get involved in these trainings. They have to volunteer for these trainings. They have to participate in trainings fully and, like, enthusiastically. Like, otherwise, it's just money wasted.
Yeah, and here's the thing. If I give you a little, like, overview, basically, this program, I've been doing prevention for 20 years, and I've never experienced, like, I've kind of experienced the whole, like, here's the stats for rape, and I'm rolling out education that was just be, like, considered awareness. Like, 1 in 4 people will be harmed. You know, here's how you stop yourself from being harmed, and when you're harmed, you can go here. And that doesn't actually stop people from being harmed. But what Green Dot does is it gets people really excited about it that aren't normally in the choir. I don't have to be a feminist to be involved, right? Here's the example. Our campus, we know that 20 to 25% of folks will be harmed on this campus, students. And staff are harmed by domestic violence, dating violence, stalking as well, and sexual violence. Not in the way, but they're still can be harmed and are. Those acts of harm are red dots. And so if we had a map of our campus, we know that if 20 to 25% of folks are being harmed, then a little red dot appears. And that red dot signifies someone who's done something, stalked someone, assaulted someone, like racist comments, microaggressions. All of these things are red dots. And green dots are things that we can do to stop that red dot from ever appearing on the map. So again, very simple, more green dots, less red dots, reduction of harm. And it's not that simple, right? But people get really excited because we're not saying don't be a perpetrator, because it's more inviting. Like, I don't come in, you know, right, and say don't be a perpetrator. And most awareness don't do that. But, like, we automatically assume that male identified folk in the room are going to be, like, recognized or targeted as potential perpetrators. This is just a focus on the bystander. No matter if somebody drank, no matter if somebody did this, no matter if somebody that no one deserves to be harmed. And here's what we can do to keep each other safe. So the idea of Green Dot is exciting to folk. Like, we trained the whole hockey team, and they were ecstatic. And they have, like, pictures of their T-shirts. They wanted to have a Green Dot game. We're having a Green Dot week. Like, they're like, let's paint the wall, you know, green dots, the week of our Green Dot game. And it excites people. It says, now I have a tangible skill that I know that I could do, and I won't lose social status. So we do have trainings. We do have engagement. We also do need to do the awareness. We do need to do, like, just general conversations. Like, but this gets people excited that, like, I've never seen before.
I definitely think, like, with groups of people who you think might be less enthusiastic about it, it's, like, really important to do it on a smaller scale.
Yes. We cannot do... Sorry, did I?
No.
Yeah. So you're so right. And that actually is evidence-based. So if we're talking about, like, what works and what doesn't work, and I can get all research in my head, but the reality is that best practices say a whole auditorium of people for 1 hour, when there's not, like, interaction, discussion, activities, is going to be less effective. So these smaller groups of folk is what is more impactful. It's activity-based. It's fun. Like, we have a contest. We give out shirts. Like, people want to be involved.
I think that's definitely, like, I would say the most important part.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to change a community or a culture if nobody is
Right. This isn't my issue.
interested in it.
No.
Yeah.
It's not my issue.
I guess this also, I mean, this is not to be, but I always think about, like, not all men, but it always just seems to be one. So, do you know what I mean? But when it is, it is.
Right. So here's the statistics. It says that 90% of men do not harm others.
Yeah.
90. So you're talking about a small percentage of people. And then I also want to talk about, like, there's queer relationships or lesbian relationships where when we talk about perpetration, when we go to not all men, that brings it down into this gender fight. And we're not really including everyone when we say men perpetrators, women victims, right? So we're missing out on a lot of important priority identities, 1, 2. So we shouldn't just bring this down to a binary. But the research is, it's not as if like women can't be perpetrators or, non-binary can't, but the reality is they're most likely to be victims, not perpetrators. Trans men aren't out hurting people. They're more likely to be victims. But here's the thing is, like, we can have these conversations. How important is it to have this conversation rather than inviting people in to be an ally, right?
Yeah.
So the approach is, not all men. Valid. Let's talk about like how we can move to the next step to be proactive. And here are some tools that could, right? Because when you start getting down to that, people turn away from it. It's like saying, like, when you use the term white privilege to white people who don't understand what white privilege is, then you're battling the concept of white privilege rather than like, let's get down and dirty and do the work, right? So it's kind of the same thing. And if we really want to talk about it, these isms, misogyny or sexism and like though they're all very much connected. Like if we get down to the root of it, they're actually very much connected. I can't end sexual violence and dating violence if I don't also like have an intersectional approach and talk about microaggressions and racism and other isms, right? Like not other isms. I meant like othering. So we very much want to incorporate a centering anti-oppression more than just centering sexual violence.
Yeah.
So yes, you're right. And yes, statistics will say here's the majority but men are hurt by other men.
And I think I more so bring that up because it's
you're right.
Like, I think it's more so encouraging to hear that, like, you know what, the hockey team was super into this training. I was like almost surprised. Do you know what I mean? I was like, I guess I wouldn't expect that. That's probably my own internal biases, but it was like good to hear, but I was like, wasn't expecting it.
We as a field have done a terrible job in getting male identified folk the resources they need, because our places are called like in nonprofit. I came from nonprofit. I don't necessarily come from a collegiate background. I worked for a place called the Women's Crisis Center. Where do you think boys are going to go if they are sexually abused? Or do you think, where do you think men are going to go if they've been assaulted by other men? Do you think they're going to go to the Women's Crisis Center? And the great thing is they're now called the Ion Center, and it's fantastic. It's in Northern Kentucky. Y'all need to check out their stuff. It's so good. We've done a terrible job. So I would say yes to what you're saying. But we have done a terrible job in our field inviting men, because we need them to put pink hats on. We need them to be all in. We haven't provided resources. We haven't given them a space to be in the movement. And so we've done a terrible job in the movement. So it is surprising that, they would be, like, we haven't done anything that would want folk to be in there,
Right.
historically, male-identified folk.
And I think that, go ahead, Jess. And I think that a lot of men and a lot of people want to be helpful to other people, but maybe, they just don't know how.
Yes.
And, maybe the whole like distract, intervene, that type of thing doesn't work for people, because some people are just truly dangerous and it makes them nervous. So I think that's kind of why, maybe the men's hockey team was so excited, or, that Green Dot gets such a good reputation is because it approaches things in a way that people
it's more
receptive to.
Yeah, their defenses are down.
Yes.
Like their defenses are down. Within the first 5 minutes, I've never said sexual violence, perpetration, awareness, statistics. It's the approach. Like when you go into something, the first thing you hear is, "Hi, I'm from the Women's Crisis Center. The Women's Crisis Center helps victims of sexual assault, blah, 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 blah." And I would go on a
Dedicated
spiel.
detectives of this.
Yeah.
Investigate these vicious felonies.
Right, yeah, right?
Law and Order SVU.
Right, yes, right? So, like, that was typical. And immediately, any participant, like, this is what the field has done for, like, 30 years. And we realized, like, we're not stopping anything coming in. Now, there's some awareness. It's important. And so I was really excited because I worked at the Women's Crisis Center when Green Dot came about. And so we have to change the way that we do the work. And it's incumbent upon us, not just the participants, but like when they realize, oh my gosh, I'm not going to be seen as a perpetrator in this space. Okay. So the defenses are down. I'm talking about my dog. I'm talking about my dog when I start. I'm not talking about, I'm at Brandon and I work at the Office of Health Promotion. We work on sexual violence. That comes at the end. Mm-hmm. We give them resources, right? So our approach is different. Like, that's important.
For sure.
Jess, how would you compare that to, like, your experiences with any, like, trainings, Everfi? I think you guys have to go to, like, what is it called? Choices for...
I don't know what it's called.
No.
It's not choices. It's like...
It used to be called choices.
It's like first year experience content, and there's, like, multiple. Yeah. And go ahead, say...
Mainly what I remember from it is, like, there were a lot of, like, jokes involved into it and, like, trying to come about it, like, in a lighter topic, but it's still, like, the same basics of, like, on the bottom line of what, like, I've always been told is, like, okay, men assault women. And I think, like, any guy that, like, wants to either reach out and, like, help or reach out and report something like he's experienced, like, both of those he's going to be discouraged to do when he's the target.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Would you say that, like, either if it's, like, a conversation you guys have, like, in your own personal friend group, or, like, have you seen that kind of, like, excitement or, like, encouragement among your peers, like, when you do have those sort of, like, conversations or trainings?
Yeah. Most of the times, like, when I go to something like that, I leave with my friends and I'm like, that didn't do much. But, like, I surround myself with the kind of people that, like, do care about these things. So, like, it's not like we need these trainings to really understand it, but there's a lot of people that could, like, use some, like, actual informative training that isn't just telling them, like, what consent is, because most of the times they already know, and, like, how to protect yourself, because there's people in the room that, like, are, like, quote unquote potential perpetrators, and, like, they don't need to know how to protect themselves.
Right.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good, like, feedback, right? Because there's always I know that specifically, like, first year experience have done a really good job. Like, let's tailor this up. Let's have more conversations. Let's have less PowerPoints. And so, you know, and then you have multiple instructors who are delivering. But I do know that there is a concerted effort to do, like, this differently there. And so this was kind of like the first year that it's kind of like very much, not first year. I know that there's been many changes, but this year specifically in first year experience. Mm-hmm. The messenger matters, though. She's going to be in one class, and then somebody else is going to experience something in another, instructor who may or may not be, right? And they've had to take it upon themselves to deliver content that they may not be comfortable delivering to. Mm-hmm. So I think it would probably also matter who is leading the discussion, who is delivering the content, who is connected to it, or they are just delivering it in this space.
Yeah, I'd say for mine, it kind of seemed like it was just like I was told to deliver this.
Yeah. Yeah.
It didn't seem like they sincerely cared about you.
Well, they probably did.
Yeah.
But it was like more of like giving a report, and like they like brought students down, and like I remember he like went through a girl's phone and was like, okay, tell me, like, can I go through this? Can I go through this? And that was like a consent talk. Mm-hmm. But most people like were just like laughing about it because she was like, oh no, don't go through my camera roll. And it was
that was
like,
for
straight.
Orientation. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's not first year experience. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Well, that was an orientation conversation, the phone thing, or was that in first year in your course?
I don't think I remember the first year course.
Okay.
But that was like when they had us in the lecture hall.
Okay, yeah, the orientation.
Yeah. I'm trying to think back to like my experiences.
We were online, Maddie.
Yeah.
we were the COVID kids.
I don't know. Do you think there's enough like excitement about it? Like, do you think maybe? How do you think it would have been different if people were like actually enthusiastic?
Like invested in it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we're constantly told the same things over and over again, and like, even if they are important, like, I get bored of hearing the same stuff, even if it does matter. And I'm like, okay, here's a consent talk. I already know about consent, and like, just going about it different ways, of like aside from just saying the same things over and over again.
And it's almost like, I don't know if you've experienced this, but it's like we're all adults here. Like, I think we can have like a nuanced conversation about it that's more than just don't rape.
Yeah.
Like, I think there's more we could be discussing rather than just like, here's how not to rape. Here's what you do when it happens.
Yeah, that's
like
mostly what
it needs to go beyond
Right,
that.
right. Yeah. So there's layers, and so I think they're like, oh, if we continue to layer, because like you're gonna maybe do a first. I don't think it's called first year experience. I'm not even sure what's called, and I'm sorry about that. There is a like if you're a new freshman and you have not like figured out what your major is, there's a course that you take.
I remember we took it. It was for our learning community.
Yes, learning community.
That's what ours was through.
Is that what you've done? Like, I don't know.
Okay, my learning community, I've heard my like roommates say like, oh, we had the sexual violence talk today, and like you shouldn't like be careful when you're drinking. We don't really do those in mine. I don't know why.
Really?
This is off. But
No, you're good.
No, it's okay.
My learning community leader, she has anxiety, and she talks a lot about anxiety, and that all of us probably have anxiety. So she says, like, she's mostly just sends us links to things because she doesn't want to make any of us uncomfortable in class.
That's interesting.
Cool.
So here's the thing is like, I don't want to just say this, but I'm just like generalizing. If somebody's had an experience with sexual violence or intimate partner violence, and they have to deliver content about it, and they haven't, or like that, I could definitely say we may not have conversations. So are you talking about general well-being and mental health, or are you talking about specific to intimate partner violence or alcohol and other drugs and other things? Any content, you're just sent links just in general, or you're like, I'm the reporter here.
Kind of more specific.
Because you do have a professor that goes with that, and
we talk about like figuring out the biggest thing we talk about, which is every class period that we do talk about like some touchy subject, it's talked about like don't get yourself overwhelmed and overworked, and we kind of just tie that in. Like if we do touch on like sexual violence or like being careful when you're going out, it's kind of tied back into that main point.
If you need to go like take care of yourself, or if you're having anxiety about something, is it more like sensitive content talk?
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah. You're like, I'm the reporter here, Anne.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting because in orientation, which is a 5-minute conversation, there's a layer. Like that's your very first like layer, and then the Everfi is another layer, and then you're saying you hear it like 4 or 5 times, and then I just read a report from It's On Us, which was basically exactly saying what you're saying. The student feedback was absolutely exact to what you're saying. I get it. Our approaches are 30 or 40 years old because we forget, like I can go into a class right now and be like, tell me what a sign of an unhealthy relationship. Students know this. So like they have more baseline knowledge than we would have 10, 20, 30 years ago, but we're still delivering content as if you don't have access to baseline knowledge that we did. Like we had to go to the library. Like I'm old, but like we're still delivering things in that manner where there's a misunderstanding that you might already have some baseline.
Yeah.
And whereas also a misunderstanding that if I have a conversation about consent, then that means a perpetrator will not perpetrate. And that doesn't stop.
Yeah.
Consent is a baseline. It's important. But to hear a consent conversation where you're at 5 times in a row, are we reducing sexual violence by a 5-minute conversation about consent? No.
Like how you were talking about green dot and like bystander intervention. I kind of lost my point, but like how you're saying like we know like what I guess, to look for, and like we know what are unhealthy signs, but we know less about like how to react to them, and that we can do something about it. Because like we're like, oh, that's happening, but I can't do anything about that, when there are ways that you can make a difference about it.
So there's 5 points, like research-wise. Is that okay to go here?
Yeah.
Right. You're like, no. there's 4 or 5 main like things about bystander intervention that need to be reviewed. Like if you're just going into a space and someone's saying, here's the 3Ds, like we did like kind of like a pre-training last year for your staff. And you will not understand bystander intervention by just getting 5 minutes of bystander intervention. Like you'll never be equipped to go do something or feel equipped. So one, you have to recognize. So you're saying, yeah, I'm going to give information on how to recognize, like when you might need to step in.
Mm-hmm.
And then we are like, oh, there's the bystander effect. Like those things that are just, they are measured. There's evidence, there's research that says. There's like 8 reasons why. Probably 4 or 5, but 4 or 5 main reasons why someone won't step in. Oh, somebody else is going to do it. Maybe it's not what I think it is. Maybe I'm going to get embarrassed. I have fear. Like I have social impact. Like, so we have to learn those things. These are the realities that I, as a 20-year bystander expert, still have barriers. They don't go away. But it's really like, and then getting around those barriers, like the direct, the distract, the delegate, and we can talk about those. But like, here's how you get around those barriers. Like, here are some tools to get around it. And then let's practice of like what you'd actually say. We're normalizing that it's hard to step in though.
Mm-hmm.
Cause like, you remember like Nancy Reagan, I mean like in journalism or like in marketing, the just say no, right?
It worked really well.
It did not.
I'm being sarcastic. I'm being sarcastic.
I know, with you. I'm not saying doing drugs is good. I'm just saying like, we have to go beyond just be a good bystander and care about your fellow person. And that's kind of like where, when we talk about bystander intervention, this goes deeper. It creates a competence. And it gives people solutions to get around those barriers. We can't just do 5 minutes of 3Ds and be like, go be a bystander.
Fantastic.
Throwing in Nancy Reagan. You know it's a good podcast when you just toss in Nancy Reagan.
I don't think we've had Nancy Reagan on the pod now. And I mean, not literally, like not
right,
like
'cause
she's
dead,
not her spirit,
right.
but like Nancy,
she was into spiritualism.
I knew that. She had an astrologer and like a.
Maybe she's here with us saying,
sitting.
I know that didn't work.
She's here on our side right now.
She's like, I tried.
I'm sure we can all agree that Nancy Reagan's known for a number of things.
Yes.
And
her husband's known for terrible drug policy.
That too.
And
criminalization of norm. Right. Okay.
In closing,
Right.
Any other thoughts that you guys would like to add to the conversation?
I talked a lot. So.
Anything?
well,
The best part of your day?
I do have one.
Yeah.
This can't be done by just students either.
Mm-hmm.
A public health approach, a social ecological approach, and I'm throwing out these terms, but basically it means that we can do all the training we want with students. If staff aren't bought in, if faculty are not bought in, if the surrounding community, bars and restaurants, are not bought in to the safety of our community, it'll never work either. A full approach of getting everybody connected to the issue is part of that too. We actually have a really cool, something coming up to do Safe Bar Network, where we can go and talk to bars and restaurants and offer them payment to train their staff. Because one of the things that bars and restaurants have is how are we going to get our staff trained? We have to pay for their time. We may not have time. There's lots of barriers there. If we do not include everyone in this, not just students, we can train Green Dot students all day long, but it has to be supported. All those other mechanisms, social marketing, social media, campaigning, student, staff, administration, have to be bought into. And that's actually part of our implementation plan as well. So I don't want to just lay it on students. It is their responsibility to stop this harm.
Right. Well, Izzy, anything else to add?
I don't have anything else. Thank you both. Thank you, Ghost and Nancy Reagan.
Yeah, thank you guys both.
Thank
for
you
being
in all
here.
seriousness. In all seriousness, thank you both so much.
I think we had really good conversation, and
Thanks for having me.
yeah,
Yeah.
can't wait for more. Thanks for coming.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Athens Happens. Make sure to check out thenewpolitical.com for more podcasts